They sold me out for $800 and thought I'd just let it go. It all started with a phone call that changed everything. One moment, I was sipping cold brew in a Portland co-working space, fine-tuning the last piece of code on a healthcare AI platform I had spent 3 years building. The next, I was hearing my father casually tell me over brunch that he and my mother had decided to sell my company to a family friend for $8,000. My name is Samantha James, and at just 24, I had developed a fully integrated platform designed to help independent therapists manage scheduling, billing, and compliance with ease. It wasn't just a side project, it was a business, and a powerful one at that. But to my parents, I was still just their overambitious daughter who should have followed the safe path to law school, like my cousins. They didn't understand the late nights, the research, the dozens of rejections I'd turned into lessons. They couldn't see the potential in what I had built. Or maybe they just didn't believe I could be the one to build it. And so without asking, without warning, they handed it off to Brian Keller, a flashy entrepreneur with 2 failed startups and a smooth pitch. They thought he could make it real. They thought I'd say thank you. But what they didn't realize was that I wasn't some naive girl tinkering with ideas. I was the founder. I was the architect. And I wasn't about to let my life's work get stolen for the price of a second-hand iPhone. They took my work, claimed it theirs, and thought I wouldn't fight back. After the shock of my parents selling my startup behind my back, I thought the worst was over. But it was just beginning. When I refused to go along with the deal, I walked out of their house with my dignity intact and my company still legally mine. Or so I thought. The next morning, I learned just how far they were willing to go. Brian Keller, the man they sold it to, a smooth talker with a string of failed ventures, had somehow gotten hold of an old external drive I used back in college. Apparently, my parents had saved it just in case. It was filled with early drafts, half-finished prototypes, and rough sketches of what would later become my full platform. None of it was the polished system I had spent years perfecting, but to someone like Brian, it was enough. Enough to fake credibility, enough to file provisional patents in his name, enough to launch a stolen version of my vision under a shiny new brand. And he didn't stop there. Brian created a website, released a press statement. He even looped my parents into his PR tour, parading them around as supportive parents who had always believed in his leadership. Local tech blogs ate it up. Young visionary reinvents mental health tech, one headline read. I stared at my laptop screen in disbelief. He was using my words, my designs, my dream. The betrayal stung more than I could admit out loud. But even worse than Brian's theft was the silence from my own family. My mom didn't return my texts. My dad claimed they were trying to do what was best. They honestly believed Brian was a better shot at success than me. Not because he knew more, but because he looked the part. He had a business degree. He wore tailored suits. He shook hands like a CEO. And to them, I was still just their daughter with messy hair and a hoodie working through the night on something they never truly understood. What they didn't know, what Brian didn't know, was that the heart of my system was never on that old drive. The real algorithms, the ones that made my platform special, were encrypted and stored securely in the cloud. My backups were protected. My patents properly filed, my LLC, registered under my name. He had stolen the shell, but not the soul. As I watched his phony company get media buzz and early investor interest, I didn't panic. I documented everything. Every email, every design draft, every contract I had signed with early partners. I gathered it all and made one call to Angela Kim, one of the sharpest intellectual property attorneys in Silicon Valley. Within minutes of hearing my story, she said, They really thought they could take your company for $800. And that's when the tide began to turn. Because what Brian didn't realize was that I hadn't just built a product, I had built proof. Proof that I was the real creator. Proof that every line of code had come from me. And when the time came to reveal the truth, I wouldn't just take back what was mine. I'd make sure everyone saw what happens when you underestimate the woman behind the innovation. They thought they could claim my work and shut me out of my own future. They were wrong. The day their stolen system crashed and burned, 2 weeks after Brian Keller launched his stolen version of my platform, he scheduled a major demo event at Cascade Valley Health, one of the largest clinics originally lined up to pilot my software. It was the kind of event founders dream about: media presence, angel investors, clinic directors, and potential strategic partners, all packed into a bright, modern auditorium. But unlike Brian, I wasn't dreaming. I was watching. I sat quietly in the back row, wearing oversized glasses and a sleek black blazer. No one recognized me. Not yet. But I knew what was coming, because while Brian had stolen files, designs, and rough prototypes, he never got his hands on the one thing he needed most: my developer key. You see, when I built the platform, I created a deep-level authentication protocol. It wasn't something you'd notice in early tests or demos. It only triggered during full-scale, real-time deployment. That way, if anyone ever tried to run the system without my explicit access credentials, it would collapse. Not in a dramatic, flashy way, but methodically, silently, fatally. The failsafe wasn't just security, it was a message. And today, that message was about to be delivered. Brian walked out on stage like he owned the place, radiating confidence he hadn't earned. He wore a navy blue blazer and that rehearsed Shark Tank-style grin. Today, he boomed to the crowd: Myers Tech redefines digital health. That's when it started. At first, it was subtle. A flicker on the screens, a delay in loading the patient dashboard. Then it hit full-force screens, flashing red error codes, piling up authentication, failure notices popping like popcorn. And in bold white text across the display, primary authentication, key missing developer, ID S. James required. He froze. Brian frantically typed on the keyboard. He restarted the system. He tried overriding the lockout, but the more he scrambled, the worse it got. Unauthorized access detected. Contact Samantha James for verification. The room, once filled with polite anticipation, shifted into silence. Investors leaned forward. Clinic staff began whispering. My parents, yes, they were there too, sitting in the front row, faces glowing with pride when the event began, turned pale. Brian looked around, lost, humiliated, and that's when I stood up. I walked calmly to the front of the room, taking my time, removing my glasses as I passed the stunned crowd. Mr. Keller, I said, my voice steady. Are you having trouble operating my platform? He didn't speak. He couldn't. The man who'd tried to steal my vision was now completely exposed. And in front of the very people he had tried to impress, I pulled my laptop from my tote bag, connected it to the projector, and logged in. The screen came back to life in under a minute. And just like that, Cascade Logic, the real platform, was alive and flawless. Real-time analytics, scheduling projections, therapist load balancing. Brian didn't even know those modules existed. Then I dropped the hammer. I presented time-stamped files, signed contracts, patent receipts, source code logs, all undeniable proof of authorship. Then I displayed the final slide, a cease and desist notice, followed by a federal lawsuit for intellectual property theft. The room erupted. Investors scrambled for the exit phones pressed to their ears. Clinic directors whispered urgently. Reporters snapped pictures. My attorney, Angela Kim, stood up from the front row with signed legal statements in hand. Brian, he stood frozen, sweating, speechless. That demo wasn't just a crash. It was a full-blown implosion of everything he thought he could fake his way into. And it was the moment the world stopped seeing me as just a girl behind a screen and finally saw me for who I really was. I hadn't just built a product, I had built proof. And in one unforgettable moment, I took back what was mine, with the entire room watching. The moment I took back everything they tried to steal. The room was dead silent when I stepped in front of the screen, the red error messages still flashing in bold behind me. Every eye in the auditorium was on me. Investors, clinic directors, journalists, even my parents who sat frozen in the front row, mouths slightly open in disbelief. Brian Keller, the man who tried to pass off my company as his own, stood at the podium, flushed and breathless, watching it all unravel. He'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, convinced he was untouchable. But the moment he tried to deploy my stolen platform, it locked him out. And now I was here to show everyone why. I connected my laptop to the projector, entered my developer key, and just like that, the entire interface came back to life, smooth, seamless, fully operational. In real time, I demonstrated features Brian didn't even know existed: appointment, forecasting, therapist, load balancing, predictive care alerts, and compliance automation. The crowd watched in awe as the system responded instantly. The version Brian had tried to sell was nothing but a hollow shell. This was the real Cascade logic. I turned to the audience. This platform, I said calmly, was designed and built by me, Samantha James. Every feature, every line of code, every piece of architecture. Brian Keller had no role in its development. He simply copied old drafts from an unauthorized backup and tried to sell my vision as his own. Then I flipped to the next slide, a full breakdown of my IP timestamps, design files, source code logs, federal copyright confirmations, signed letters of intent from early clients, and finally a formal cease and desist letter addressed to Brian Keller and his false company. Gasps rippled across the room. Brian tried to recover. "She's lying, her parents gave me access," they said, but he didn't get to finish. Angela Kim, my attorney, stood from the front row and raised a folder. "I have sworn statements confirming that Mr. Keller had no legal right to the IP or associated business documentation. We also have evidence of unauthorized system access and multiple counts of forgery." And just like that, everything shifted. Investors jumped out of their seats, whispering urgently into phones. Funding was being pulled in real time. Clinic staff huddled together, asking about legal liability. Journalists surged forward, cameras clicking, as Brian backed away from the podium like a man being chased. And my parents, they looked completely undone. My mom's eyes welled up. My dad turned the color of rust. They'd spent months supporting a fraud because they didn't think I was capable. Now they were watching the truth destroy the fantasy they bought into. As for me, I felt no panic, no anger, just clarity. I ended the demo by projecting one final image, a sleek black card with 3 simple words printed across it: guest pass, back row. Then I turned to the audience one last time. "My name is Samantha James. I'm the founder and CEO of Cascade Logic Systems. And we are not just redefining digital healthcare, we are protecting the future of innovation. Because when you create something with everything you have, you don't let anyone take it. Not for $8,000, not for anything." That moment wasn't just about reclaiming my company. It was about reclaiming me, the version of me they all dismissed, the girl they overlooked, the builder, the fighter, the founder. And now the whole world knew it. The lawsuit that changed everything. The moment I walked off that stage at Cascade Valley Health, I wasn't the same woman who had entered through the back door just an hour earlier. Brian Keller had just been publicly exposed as a fraud in front of investors, clinic executives, and even my own parents. But the real reckoning was still ahead. That night marked the beginning of a full-scale legal takedown, one that would not only protect my company, Cascade Logic Systems, but make sure no one ever tried to steal from me again. With every shred of evidence, I had gathered timestamps, patent filings, source code entries, client emails. I worked with my attorney, Angela Kim, to build an airtight case of intellectual property theft. Angela wasn't just any lawyer. She was a legend in Silicon Valley, known for dismantling fraudulent startups and exposing corporate copycats who thought they could take shortcuts through other people's innovation. And in Brian's case, there were no cracks to hide in. He had filed fake patents using outdated versions of my design's claim development milestones that never happened, and even roped my parents into signing witness statements about a timeline that didn't exist. The moment he ran that demo and my encryption triggered the fail-safe, his whole story collapsed. Angela filed a federal lawsuit within days, including claims of unauthorized system access, patent infringement, and fraud. The press picked up the story immediately. Headlines weren't about young tech visionary Brian Keller anymore. They were about theft, exposure, and collapse. Investors who had once praised his confidence now couldn't distance themselves fast enough. Within a week, his funding evaporated. His startup was blacklisted by every major venture capital network on the West Coast. By the time we had our first court hearing, Brian wasn't standing tall, he was sinking fast. What amazed me most was how fast the industry shifted once the truth came out. The very same people who once overlooked me because I didn't look the part were now reaching out with apologies, partnership offers, and even investment proposals. But I wasn't quick to forgive. This wasn't about ego. It was about protecting what I had built from the ground up. Cascade Logic wasn't just a software platform. It was my life's work. It had the potential to transform mental health care delivery, reduce intake delays, and give independent therapists the tools they needed to thrive in an overwhelmed system. No one else had the right to put their name on it but me and my parents. They tried to rewrite the narrative, claimed they had only wanted to help, that they were misled, but it was too late. They had signed away my future for $8,000 and a handshake simply because they didn't believe I could be enough on my own. Now they had to sit and watch while the daughter they once dismissed took control of a company poised to change an entire industry. Winning the lawsuit was more than a legal victory. It was a turning point. It reminded me and everyone else that ideas are powerful, but only when you protect them. I framed that $8,000 check and hung it behind my desk at Cascade Logic HQ, not out of spite, but as a reminder that no one gets to define your value but you. Brian Keller tried to steal my vision. My parents didn't believe in it, but in the end, I proved them all wrong, not with words, but with action ownership and the relentless defense of what was mine. 6 months later, I took the stage and everything was different. It had been 6 months since I stood in that crowded auditorium and exposed Brian Keller for the fraud he was. Since then, everything had changed. My company, Cascade Logic Systems, not only recovered its sword, we closed a $50 million Series A funding round. Our pilot program exceeded every metric we set. Clinics reported a 48% reduction in patient intake delays, a 41% increase in resource efficiency, and predictive analytics so accurate it felt like science fiction. But none of that compared to the feeling I had when I stepped onto that stage, not to defend myself, but to lead. This time it wasn't a courtroom or a sabotage demo. It was the annual Health Tech West Conference in San Francisco. I was the keynote speaker. I wasn't there to fight for my company. I was there to celebrate it. And somewhere in the back of the audience, I saw them, my parents. They hadn't spoken to me much since the lawsuit wrapped. The tone of their messages had shifted from frustration to admiration and now regret. I knew why they came. They wanted to be proud again, maybe even forgiven. But pride that only arrives after success is something else entirely. It's not rooted in love. It's tied to recognition, to status. And for a long time, that's all I ever was. To them, a potential success story they didn't believe in until the rest of the world did. As I spoke about our mission to modernize mental health infrastructure across the country, I didn't look at them. I focused on the people who did believe, my team, my investors, the therapists who were finally being seen and supported by technology designed just for them. And yet part of me couldn't help but think about the road that brought me here, how I had to fight not just fraud, but doubt from the people who should have been my first advocates. After the event, they approached me, slower than before, smaller somehow. "Casey, sweetheart," my mother said gently, her voice trembling. "We're proud of you. We really are. We're sorry." I paused, not out of cruelty, but because I needed to say it right. "I know you're sorry," I said quietly, "but being sorry after I proved you wrong isn't the same as believing in me before I did." My father stepped in, his voice cracking. "Can't we just move past this? We're family." I looked at him, this man who once told me I was just playing with code, and said calmly, "Family supports you. Family doesn't sell your life's work to a stranger." Then I reached into my pocket and handed each of them a black card. It wasn't a business card, just 3 words printed cleanly across the front guest pass. "Back row. If you want to see what I'm building," I said, "you're welcome. But from now on, you'll watch from the back. If you want to meet with me, you can schedule through my office, like everyone else." I didn't say it with anger. I said it with clarity. Because I wasn't the underestimated girl they once dismissed. I was the CEO of a company reshaping digital healthcare across the U.S. and beyond. They tried to rewrite my story, but I had already written the ending. And this time, it was on my terms. I framed the check, not out of spite, but for the truth behind my desk at Cascade Logic. HQ hangs an $8,000 check framed in polished walnut and glass. It's not a trophy, and it's not a grudge. It's a reminder that my worth was never defined by that check or by the people who once saw my ambition as a phase. My parents thought they were doing me a favor, selling off my company to someone with a business degree and a confident handshake. But I knew better. I knew what I built, what I protected, and most importantly, who I was. They saw a side project. I saw a future, and I fought for it with everything I had. Today, Cascade Logic Systems is transforming digital healthcare across the country and entering global markets. Brian Keller is a footnote, blacklisted, forgotten, whispered about in cautionary tales. My parents still reach out sometimes, but I no longer need their approval. I learned the most powerful success is the kind you achieve not to prove others wrong, but to prove yourself right. Your value isn't measured by someone else's belief in you. It's measured by your ability to believe in yourself, especially when no one else does. Protect your vision, fight for your work, and never shrink to fit the story others write for you. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment below. Tell me about your own moment of standing up for yourself. Have you ever been underestimated? How did you rise? Subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of resilience, innovation, and what happens when you choose yourself.